Hi everyone. A viewer of mine, namely CL Strife, of course, was asking me recently what happens to INFJs when they are stretched too thin. And I want to tackle that question because, well, what it implies for INFJs is potentially quite interesting. So the first element of response that we can give here is that, well, when an INFJ is stretched thin, what happens to them is similar to what happens to anyone who's stretched too thin, namely an increase in anxiety. Now, what do they do with that anxiety? And here I think that there's different ways, of course, that different people deal with anxiety of that nature. And there's probably going to be a rough categorization, into how extroverts react and how introverts react, with, of course, then further variations within particular groups of introverts and particular groups of extroverts. But in the case of INFJs, who are definitely introverts, there will almost systematically be a tendency to retreat into your sort of not quite asocial, but withdrawn comfort zone. Let's not forget that the existential constitution of INFJs is defined by alienation. So being alienated is something that is relatively natural for two INFJs, and a surge of anxiety is going to tend to encourage INFJs to retreat, withdraw, until the anxiety reduces and until they no longer feel like they're being stretched thin, right? What's interesting is to look at how different subtypes of INFJs might react to this. There's different experiences that are going to be had depending on the kind of INFJ you are. So if you're, in the first place, an adaptive submissive INFJs, the risk of being stretched too thin is in fact quite high. I would say being stretched too thin is probably like one of the maybe 2 or 3 most likely dangers that the adaptive INFJ is exposing themselves to. And this for a relatively straightforward reason, is that an INFJ who is adaptive submissive, predominantly dominated by the desire to get along with other people, be accepted, even if it means a repression of their individuality, and in this particular case, the subjectivity that accrues to their NI worldview. Now, if they repress that, if they ignore that, in the interests of what they project the group's demands to be, the norms of the group, the rules of the group, the organizations of the group, and so on, well, they're likely to ignore themselves, right? Because when you ignore your individuality, when you ignore your subjectivity, in a sense, when you ignore your nature, that does not mean that your nature disappears. It means you're repressing it, but there is a limit to which you can repress it until your nature comes back with a bang, and usually manifests in the form of particular symptoms. And the symptom of overwhelm, the symptom of, socially speaking, being stretched too thin, is going to be a symptom that adaptive INFJs experience pretty much as a result of favoring an extroverted function, namely FE, over an introverted one, namely NI, even though their baseline is an NI baseline and not an FE baseline. So they're going to be stretched thin. They're going to experience that. But here is the interesting thing. In that moment of crisis, there's an opportunity, to paraphrase a way too overused saying that apparently comes from Gandhi, I think. But anyway, in that moment of crisis, there is indeed an opportunity. Because what is it that adaptive submissive INFJs need fundamentally? Well, what INFJs need fundamentally when they are adaptive submissive is, may I be provocative in view of a recent video that I released? May I be provocative on purpose and say that what they need is a little bit more narcissism? And when I say this, I don't mean more narcissistic personality disorder type narcissism. I mean more folding back into the self. And if I wanted to be less provocative, the way I would put it is that they need to focus more on the development of their NI function, not just in terms of its expansion, but also in terms of its consolidation. This is a distinction that I've started to use. Maybe you've noticed that in more recent videos. There's a difference between an NI consolidation, worldview consolidation, and worldview expansion. In a sense, you need consolidation before you can expand, but some INFJs stop at consolidation. That's the case of the solipsist. And some INFJs don't get started. That's the adaptive submissive. But the opportunity for the INFJ who's adaptive submissive when they experience the crisis that leads them to being stretched thin is that when they retreat, this might be an opportunity for them to realize, you know what, I can actually manage by myself. I don't entirely depend on other people. I ought to question this kind of behavior that leads me to persistently feel anxious from overstretch on, like I said, periodically in a recurrent fashion. There's something off there. Maybe through the help of therapy or maybe by myself, I realized maybe I need to learn to spend more time for myself, by myself, and develop my NI, because in effect, this is what will start happening if they end up trusting that they can be by themselves and the world around them is not going to collapse and that people around them are not going to abandon them. The NI worldview is going to start consolidating. And in fact, what is interesting is that if they can, at that particular moment, if they can learn to not make the decision to say, oh my God, this consolidation of NI is amazing, I'm going to stay there because then I'm going to turn into solipsist. But to say, I'm going to use the particular insights, the particular growth that I have learned I could achieve in a more withdrawn, isolated fashion when I focus more on myself, and bring it back to the social realm, which after all, I have become kind of familiar with, even though I was relating to it in a manner of kind of, obedient submission in some sense. Now that my NI worldview has become more developed, I can relate to it differently in the liberated mode. This is how you progressively through practice, you learn to resolve the issue of severance and develop a more spiritualized approach. There's a reason again why INFJs who are a bit older, a bit wiser, tend to also be more spiritualized, because they've experienced enough in life that they have been adaptive submissives. They have gone through these crises. They've learned to appreciate the more solipsistic approach, and then over time and through trial and error, learn to combine these different aspects and find that majestic in between, the compromise where they can link the external reality and the NI world. So I think there's a real opportunity there when an adaptive submissive INFJ is stretched thin. There's also there the opportunity for growth, but they need to pay attention to these opportunities. If I want to discuss the question of the solipsist being stretched thin, but this video started to run a little long, so I'll dedicate the next one immediately after this one, in fact, to the solipsistic INFJ, what happens to them, because it's different challenges, different risks, possibly more risks. But we'll see that in a minute. In fact, for you, from your perspective, it will be discussed tomorrow. In any case, before I move on, just remember that I've explored a lot about the adaptive, submissive INFJ, the solipsist, the liberated INFJ, all kinds of INFJs that you can be in the world, in this world that often we see as hostile. I've explored that in a lot of depth in The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World. You can get it at the link below. Explores all these topics and looks how INFJs can find happiness, purpose, value, and self-assertiveness in this world. Check it out, and if you love the book and haven't reviewed it, please consider reviewing it on Amazon, okay? I need more reviews. There's way more of you who've read it than reviewed it. It only takes a few minutes, and God, you have no idea how much it helps with the referencing. The Ecstatic Soul, of course, is the prequel to The Infinite Soul. It looks more at the inside of the INFJ mind, INFJ consciousness, what it's like to be an INFJ. It's the most in-depth study of it. Get it as well, the link below. And as usual, I'd like to remind you that what is the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. Please consider donating to my channel to help me keep going with this channel and with the production. You can get access to bonus content, interact with me, suggest new videos. Link to my Patreon is below. Thank you very much, and see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.